So commonly, IQ tests will underreport the IQ of somebody who has dyslexia. So Trey, I'm happy to tell you it's probably unlikely that your IQ really is 70, 75, unless every subtest of the IQ test scored in that range. So somebody who truly has a lower IQ, which basically means it's not a measure of your potential, it's a measure of your rate of learning. Somebody with a lower IQ, if it is 70 or 75, and I've worked with people who have IQs in the 70s or the 75s, they can still learn how to read, they can still learn how to spell, they can still learn math skills, but it might take them 2 to 3 times longer to learn that basic level skills as somebody who has a higher IQ. So IQ doesn't tell us how much or how far we can take you in learning. It just tells us it's probably going to be a longer road. It's going to take more time. We don't really quite know when we're going to hit a ceiling of you've got your skills at your maximum potential. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Dyslexia Discussions and More. I'm Dr. Tim Conway. I'm trained in neuropsychology, peer review published in neurodevelopmental disorders. That's all the learning disabilities, autism, Down syndrome, all those different kind of difficulties can happen that we now today are also calling neurodiversity, the difference of strengths and weaknesses in the brain and the body. Also peer review published in fMRI brain imaging, peer review published in neurorehabilitation, which is post-stroke rebuilding skills, and peer review published in treatment of developmental difficulties like dyslexia. How do you actually take weaker skills and make them stronger? And so today we're just going to talk just in specifics about neuropsychological assessments. And we've invited people to post some questions. We've got some questions that we'll be answering. And you can live stream post questions as well, whether you post them to LinkedIn or to the Facebook platforms or to one of the other many social media platforms. We should be able to see them live. They should post up here and we can answer those as we're going along. So my background training, yes, is at University of Florida. That's where I did my PhD, multiple years of postdoctoral studies in post-stroke neurorehabilitation, fMRI, other types of imaging technologies, and have now focused on taking all that science information and trying to make it digestible and accessible and guiding for anybody who's a parent of a child with learning difficulties or difficulties and challenges, anybody who has difficulties themselves, and that's of every decade of life. Whether you're 6, 16, 36, 66, doesn't matter. The brain's plasticity is always there. And there's always the ability to actually take these skills and make them stronger, to change them. So let's first just start by talking about what is a neuropsychological evaluation. Some people know what that is and some people don't. Some people hear it's described as the gold standard of what you should be looking for if you're trying to understand what your child is struggling with. And so keep in mind, there's a list of different aspects of a neuropsych, and we'll put the list up here on the screen and we can kind of scroll through it. And it's a little small print on the screen, so I'll talk you through it as we go. But, essentially, hope that doesn't make it better. Yeah, we'll leave it. That's about as big as I can get it. Even if I go to this size, yeah. All right, we're just double checking how we get it to be as visible as possible, but we'll read it off to you. So you've got, everyone understands that IQ is part of a psychological assessment. That's true for school psychs. It's true for neuropsychs. And IQ really is just an estimate of some of your skill sets. And it doesn't predict anything, doesn't predict life success. It kind of tells us how powerful is the engine that you've got in your head. Is it one that should be operating around the 50th percentile? Is it going to be functioning like around the 75th percentile? Is it going to be functioning around the 25th percentile? And those percentiles just mean, is learning going to be easier or more effortful over time? Doesn't matter what your IQ is. Everybody has the ability to learn. The IQ just kind of predicts how easy it's going to be to learn, how much information you can learn, and how advanced you might be able to build some of your skills. So besides IQ, a neuropsych eval is also measuring attention and concentration. And why? Well, understand that attention precedes cognition. Attention comes before thinking, learning, and reasoning. And so if you want to maximize your learning, you want to have the best focus skills you have. Even when someone gets diagnosed with an attentional disorder, they call it, like ADHD, it doesn't mean that they don't have attention. That name is really not a great diagnostic descriptor. That really means they have difficulty focusing their attention where it needs to be. Like say, for example, you're in a classroom and the teacher's giving a lesson at the front of the room. You really are going to need to actually allocate all your attention to the teacher, not to the kid next to you who's being naughty and disruptive, not to the bird you saw out the window. Because if your attention goes to the kid, or if your attention goes to the bird, that's where your learning goes as well. And you're missing the information the teacher is presenting. So it's not that you don't have attention. Even with a diagnosis of ADHD, you've got attention. The question is, how well can you focus it to facilitate learning and the ability to do whatever task it is you're trying to do? So there's different aspects of attention. There's focus, there's shifting attention, there's things that you might miss, there's things you might respond to when you shouldn't respond. There's several different factors of how we look at attention. And there's different attentional systems. You have visual attention versus auditory attention. Some people are great when they're using their eyes to stay focused, but when it's just auditory, they find themselves kind of daydreaming or drifting off, and they realize, oh wait, I missed everything. So understand too, attention is a very complicated system, but it's really important from the role it plays in efficiency of learning and your ability to take in and learn information. So the neuropsych eval has different ways to measure attention. And besides just tests of attention, because people will say, well, what if the kid just happened to fade out during that test? When you're doing a real neuropsychological evaluation, it's going to take multiple hours. The neuropsychologist is measuring your attention during all the activities you're doing. They can tell, are you losing focus? Did you forget the directions? Were you really not focused when they gave the directions? And that may have been a contributing factor to why you didn't quite get the directions. And so then all those pieces have to be coming together. And the neuropsychologist is looking just at your overall behaviors in the testing session, in addition to how you're performing on the, quote, attention test. So keep that in mind. There's lots of pieces of that. There's also verbal learning. You're looking at verbal learning skills, and there's learning of visual information. There's learning of auditory information. There's short-term learning. There's long-term learning. And there's what we call working memory. So there's different aspects of that learning memory system. And we look at different aspects of visual memory, verbal memory, working memory. Working memory just means how well you can manipulate information. Somebody who's a very skilled, mechanic, who's an SAE certified mechanic, probably has really great skills in visual and visual working memory because they can picture the engine in their head. They can rotate it 360. They can take it apart. They can put it back together. And others may have really good visual memory and really good verbal memory. They can remember a whole list of instructions and directions in their auditory memory, as well as see what it's talking about simultaneously in visual memory. And the goal is the more strengths that you have, the easier it is to function and perform whatever task you're trying to do. So besides memory, then there's also motor skills. Motor skills have to do with fine motor skills, how you use your fingers for zippers, buttons, pencil and paper tasks, playing pickup sticks, lots of different fine motor skill activities. Some of them are related to daily living activities. Some of them are related to school activities. So it depends on what the issue is that may impact on the testing the neuropsychologist does and what aspects of their motor skills they actually might measure. Now, when you measure visual skills by themselves, and then you also measure motor skills by themselves, a common part in school is visual plus motor. Can you look at the board and copy down on paper? And you look it up and copy down, or do you have to look up and then look down, and look up and then look down? But you can't really kind of look up and kind of keep writing as you're looking around and just only glance a little bit. More advanced visual motor skills means it's an easier system to use for either taking information in or for producing, doing something as well. So besides that memory system and that motor system, we also have executive functioning. And executive function really relates to planning, organizing, problem solving, your ability to inhibit, to not do something that you know is not a good thing to do, like don't step off that ledge. You might fall and break a leg. So it looks interesting, but it's probably a little bit too far. And you learn how to inhibit yourself. There's cognitive flexibility. Can you flex and change and do how you do things differently? Because you're still able to adapt and navigate your environment. And executive function is also decision-making. Executive function really is a slave system to memory. It's a slave system to language skills. It's a slave system to visual memory and auditory memory, because it means you're going to execute on something. If you have struggles in using words, you have struggles in remembering things, there's not much for the executive function to execute on or to plan, organize, and conduct. So know that it's not so much that executive function drives memory, it's a little bit more the other way around. If you can remember the 10 things, then can you hold on to them and get them in an order and a sequence of the activities you want to do, and the executive function can help you hold on to and execute those things. Like say, for example, a very simple common test of executive function is to ask somebody, tell me how you make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And if it's somebody who's had a traumatic brain injury, they may really struggle to tell you in a very organized, sequential, and accurate detail fashion. If it's a child, they have not had a head injury, but they've got some language speaking difficulties, not articulation, but they struggle to put their words together. They may really struggle to tell you the 10 steps of making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, even if they've already made one or they make one every week. They struggle to get the words, to put the words together, to explain it back to you. So besides executive function, then we also have those language skills. You have vocabulary, you have language input skills, you have language output skills, and part of neuropsych testing measures different aspects of language function. Now know that each of these areas that I'm talking about, there's actually some of these areas have a whole profession just allocated to them. So the whole profession that's allocated to language is speech-language pathologists. The whole profession that's allocated to visual, sensory motor, and coordination body function, that's occupational therapists. Both do more than that, but they have the more deeper knowledge base and deeper understanding than typically what's going to go into a neuropsych eval. So don't be surprised sometimes if you take your 10-year-old to get a neuropsych, you might get a recommendation of further evaluation would be warranted with an occupational therapist who understands sensory motor development, maybe from the perspective of what we call sensory integration, which is how these motor skills usually build. Or a neuropsych eval might actually say, another recommendation is a language eval. We want the speech therapist to more explicitly measure spoken language skills, because about 6 or 8 different things you can measure in spoken language. Input or receptive language skills, how will you take information in? Again, multiple things you can measure there as well, multiple different tests. Believe it or not, speech therapists and neuropsychologists use 2 different types of vocabulary tests. One of them is actually a receptive vocabulary test. You're shown 4 pictures. The neuropsychologist says a word to the participant, and all they have to do is point to which of the 4 pictures goes with that word. It's called receptive because you're listening and taking in the word, trying to figure out what it means, and then you're picking the picture that matches the meaning. The reverse is a vocabulary test that measures expressive language. So it's called an expressive one-word picture vocabulary test. That's an example of the name of one of them, but there's other expressive vocabulary tests, and it's different. This time, the neuropsychologist shows you one picture, and you're required to say the word that describes that picture. We're looking at word retrieval. How well can you get the information out? How well can you share it? So besides the motor skills of a neuropsych eval, the language skills of a neuropsych eval, the memory skills of a neuropsych eval, we also have something called processing speed. And this, unfortunately, is a very confusing term for most people, because some people equate this to, oh, it's how fast the kid thinks or how fast the teenager can process information. That sounds logical, but when you look at the tests that are used to measure processing speed, most of the processing speed tests are visual motor pencil and paper tests. So they're actually more a functional measure of the efficiency with which you conduct visual motor tasks, not how fast you can think up ideas, not how fast you can answer a question, or not how fast you can learn information from somebody else. That's really not what processing speed measures, although it makes sense from that general term that you might think that's what they're talking about. So know that processing speed is really more of a way to describe one aspect of visual motor functioning. Now, all of those skills together, and one more, emotional, psychological functioning, your mood, your anxiety level, how well you stay focused on what you're doing and don't get too lost in your thoughts or worries or fears or concerns. How well you can manage that anxiety level also impacts part of neuropsych testing. And so the neuropsychologist is looking at what's your emotional demeanor. Are you sad and sullen? Are you hyper and overactive? Are you super giddy and super laughing and it's really not even something funny happening? Does your emotional presentation match the setting? And how well can you control emotions? Those are also part of daily functioning. There's a certain way people expect you to behave, if you're Catholic and you grew up going to Catholic Mass, and it's not bouncy, joyful, waving, high-fiving everybody, that's the kind of stuff you might do at a birthday party. But in Catholic Mass, it's pretty much a subdued environment, not too much expressive, facial expressions, not too much bouncing around. Calm yourself, stay focused, and focus on the Father and what he's sharing and the message of the day. So your understanding and your awareness of those emotional levels will impact how you can function. And part of the neuropsych eval is going to look at that as well. The other piece is your socialization skills, your adaptive planning, adaptive functioning skills. And sometimes these are questionnaires that neuropsychologists give. And the questionnaires really measure how much of your daily living skills can you do by yourself? How much do the parents have to help you do, like getting dressed, daily routines of self-care, showering, brushing your hair, brushing your teeth. In some situations, those areas need to be measured as well, because maybe somebody really struggles with that self-care. And it might be somebody who has a different diagnosis from a range of difficulties. The diagnosis isn't what matters. What matters is how much can you do on your own, and how do we help understand that, and how do we help you have the most functional and most functional quality life as possible for the individual and for the family when they're living at home, or for the individual and the environment that they live in if they're older. So from the neuropsych eval, you're comparing all these measures in all these different areas. Let me recap them again. And there's a second page on this one. I'm sorry, I didn't slip to the second page. So I'll go with this one top to bottom. It's talking about general IQ. It's talking about attention, concentration. It's talking about your memory and learning skills. It's talking about your executive function, higher level reasoning, thinking skills. Neuropsych might look at your language and communication skills. Neuropsych's also going to look at your visual, spatial, and motor skills. It can look at your processing speed, which is basically visual motor efficiency. It can look at your academic skills. And I didn't say this yet, but all the skills we've been talking about up to this point can have an impact on how well or how easy it is for you to perform in your academics. And so sometimes individuals are going to a neuropsychologist to ask about, does my child have a learning difficulty? Do they have a dyslexia, which really just means, do they struggle to sound out words? And are they very inaccurate in how they actually read words? And we'll jump to another slide later on that talks about there's only 3 criteria for a diagnosis of dyslexia. And flipping words is not one of them. And those of us who have dyslexia, because I have dyslexia, but I have what we call empowered dyslexia or remediated dyslexia. It means I got early intervention to strengthen weaker skills so I don't struggle to read and spell, except for when I might be going too fast and my brain gets ahead of my hand, or my brain gets ahead of my eyes and I might skip and misread something, but typically I can catch it and correct it. So there's really only 3 criteria to a diagnosis of dyslexia. One is reading accuracy is a difficulty. The other is reading speed can be the difficulty. And the last one is reading comprehension. How well do you understand what you're reading? That's it. For people who are actually professionals who are licensed to diagnose dyslexia. I clearly say that with a great enunciation and emphasis, because many people who do educational evals are actually not licensed to diagnose dyslexia. So they might tell you things like, well, your child has dyslexia characteristics. Your child has some of the symptoms of dyslexia. And if you don't understand that some professions are not licensed to diagnose, you may think you're going for a dyslexia diagnostic eval, and you're actually just going to get some information about the learning profile of your child with no diagnoses. So it's really important that if you're going to a professional, whether it's a school psychologist, a speech pathologist, clinical psychologist who does child practice, or a neuropsychologist who does child practice as well, and your goal is to get the diagnosis, you would really want to ask ahead of time, do you diagnose dyslexia and are you licensed to do that? Believe it or not, I've had some clients go to a neuropsychologist and the parents went because they wanted to know if their child had dyslexia. And at the end of the eval, the neuropsychologist actually said to them, yeah, I don't really ever diagnose anybody with dyslexia. I'm not really sure it exists. Well, herein lies the latitude that exists in any profession. There's latitude in how pediatricians operate. There's latitude in how speech therapists operate, OTs, and there's latitude in how neuropsychologists operate. So it's really important for you to ask what you're looking for. Is that something this person has expertise in? And another way that people do this sometimes too is they ask other people who've actually already gone to that professional. What did you like about the assessment? Did you think it was accurate? Did you get information that you were looking for? And sometimes if you have that opportunity, that's a real good way to get some background to make sure that you're getting the right fit with the professional their interests, their skills, their expertise, and the questions that you're proposing. Note too that some neuropsychologists use what's called a fixed battery assessment. It's not as common because it takes like a whole day. It might be like 8 hours of testing. It can be exhausting. Other neuropsychologists might use something that's like a flexible battery. And so flexible is they're going to pick and choose tests based on the questions that you're asking. If you're not asking about emotional functioning, depression's not a concern, there's no real mood issues, they're probably not going to do 3 or 4 or 5 tests on emotional mood and attention, or emotional mood and anxiety. If emotion and mood and depression and anxiety are a big part of why you're coming in, then they're probably going to do more testing in those areas. But you have no concerns about academics, then the neuropsychologist is probably going to do very little, if any, testing of reading, writing, spelling, comprehension, math skills, because it's not part of the question that you're coming in with. So that's another thing to understand too, is to ask the neuropsychologist what approach to use and make sure that you've clearly identified the questions you have, the information you're looking to get answers on, and you now know that you've got yourself matched up with the right person. Then you've got those skills going together. So from this perspective too, let's jump over to what I was just talking about, and that is the aspect of when we're diagnosing from a neuropsychologist eval. This is the manual that all neuropsychologists are supposed to use. There's nobody that forces them to use it, but most of us are trained. Use this. It's got very clearly defined criteria. They're very well organized. They tell you exactly what meets the diagnosis, what does not meet the diagnosis. And it's a way to have some consistency and some efficiency in how the profession operates. So DSM-5 is used by speech pathologists. It's used by neuropsychologists, school psychologists who are licensed to diagnose, because some school psychologists do not have a license to diagnose. I know that might sound surprising, but it depends on how they're operating in their private environment, or if they're just operating within a school environment. That affects the license they might have. So as we said, in the DSM-5, we have this thing called a specific learning disorder with impairment in reading. That's synonymous. That's what the yellow box shows you. It's synonymous with the diagnosis of dyslexia. It just means dyslexia and specific learning disorder with impairment in reading are the same diagnostic description. They're used interchangeably. It's an alternate term. One's more popular than the others. People used to say, well, dyslexia is a medical diagnosis. It's really not a medical diagnosis. It's a behavioral diagnosis, just like all the things in the DSM-5 are. These are behavioral diagnoses. So you can either have poor reading accuracy, and that would be enough to qualify you as a diagnosis of dyslexia. But you also could have good accuracy, but you're really slow at reading. It's a very, very extremely slow rate. That by itself is enough to diagnose you with dyslexia. Or reading might be perfectly fine. You read accurately, you read smoothly, but man, you do not remember a single thing in what you read. And parents are like, it goes in one ear and out the other. And they're puzzled I watched her read it. She seemed like she's paying attention, but when I asked her to summarize it, she could only give me a few nouns or a few adjectives, and she couldn't really even tell me all the information the story said. And I just thought she just wasn't paying attention. And that's explicitly what many parents have told me when they find out that their child actually has a reading comprehension deficit. And reading comprehension being problematic is by itself enough to be diagnosed with a specific learning disorder with impairment in reading, also called dyslexia. So that's the pieces of that diagnostic slide. Now, understand too that one of the reasons why neuropsychologists are measuring all those areas is because there's many different questions that might be being asked to answer. And so whether it's a motor aspect, because maybe they're finding out that this child really struggles to do their written assignments. And the question I have to figure out is it the spelling part of the written assignment that makes the child struggle and they're not really good at getting that work done? Is it the attentional part? They get distracted and the classmates are writing and they're looking around and there's a squirrel and they're just actually not doing the work because they keep losing focus? Is it the actual act of writing that's really effortful to get their hand and the fingers working together and they'll tell you, oh, my hand cramps. They start shaking their hand. And what you might find out is some kids have decreased sensory perception of the hand and fingers, and they're pushing so hard with the pencil that they actually do fatigue the hand faster. And you can tell them, well, don't push so hard, but actually they don't have any choice. They're not doing it on purpose. They're doing it because If they don't push that hard, they have trouble feeling where their hand is on the paper. So we'd say they have decreased sensory awareness of their fingers. There's actually a test called finger agnosia. And agnosia just means lack of awareness to a degree. And what they do is they cover the child's hand, kind of put it behind a barrier so they can't see their hand. And they might touch two fingers and the child can't see what they're touching. And they might ask them, which fingers am I touching? Lift up the fingers I'm touching. And some kids can't tell you which fingers you touched unless they see them. They've got decreased sensory awareness of the hands. And that can make it more problematic to do fine motor skills, because it's kind of like, your hands are a little club-like and they're hard to tell how you're manipulating. And some people are like, oh, my fingers are all thumbs. I struggle to, even do buttons. I struggle to tie my shoes. It took me forever to learn that. That could be aspects of those fine motor skills or visual motor skills not working as efficiently. So the neuropsychologist is trying to tease out all the potential explanations for why this student is having trouble doing the written examples or the written work in the classroom. And so understanding how these pieces work together gives the neuropsychologist a better idea to, one, understand, is there a diagnosis? And two, what are we going to do about it? Because most parents really don't come to a neuropsychologist just to get a diagnosis. It's helpful sometimes, and many people will say, oh yeah, it's so helpful to know I have a dyslexia. I always just wondered why I struggle so much, and I thought maybe I'm just not very smart. And let's be very clear, dyslexia and all learning difficulties have no correlation to IQ. Dyslexia or dysgraphia, which is writing and spelling and written composition struggles, or dyscalculia, which are math struggles, they happen to anybody at any level of IQ. Low, middle, high IQ, doesn't matter. Anybody can have those diagnoses. So it absolutely is not related to IQ, but you'll commonly understand that when you struggle in school, you feel like I must not be as bright as somebody else. And that's 100% not the case. So the goal for the neuropsychologist is use that evaluation to help figure out what's going on. If there's diagnoses, sometimes it helps qualify the student, if they're in school age, for services. Sometimes the diagnoses for an adult might help them better understand what they struggle and what can they do about it. And there's about 3 ways you can make attempts to change or accommodate or work around learning difficulties. There's a big push today to get the work environment to change. We need to have a dyslexia-friendly workplace. And I mean, good luck with all of that, because that means, okay, then we have to have the blind-friendly workplace and the hearing-impaired-friendly workplace and the emotion regulation-friendly work. And pretty soon it's almost impossible because the workplace cannot always adapt to everybody's strengths and weaknesses. So it's going to be limited on how much workplace change can do to enable an advanced function. Doesn't mean they shouldn't do it. It just means that may not give us the best outcome for the person. Because what if that person has the ability to take some of their weaker skills and make them stronger? Why wouldn't we want them to have stronger skills, and then they can adapt to most any work environment? So if you're someone who struggles to read and you're reliant on speech to text to send text messages, or you're reliant on speech to text to compose emails, or you're reliant on screen readers to read the stuff back to you so you don't have to worry about mixing up the words. That's fine for some situations, but other situations it's not accessible. There's not a screen reader when you're at the gas station and stuff's going up on the gas pump and it's sending you messages. Sometimes they go by pretty quickly. That can make functional skills like that very frustrating because your skills aren't matching the level that you're being presented with the information. But if we change those skills, if we take those weaker skills and make them stronger, then you've got more ability to do what you want to do. So trying to understand how these pieces go together, then you've got a better idea of how they actually might work. Let me throw a question up right now because this looks like a very interesting question. I'll pull that slide down from the screen there, and we'll put up Mr. Trey's question here. And Trey's got the question saying, oops, sorry, wrong side. What's the average IQ of someone with dyslexia? This person's dyslexic. He was told back in 2002 that he had an IQ between 70 and 75. He's not sure he believes that now. And Trey, I tell you, 100% don't believe that IQ. And here's why. Anybody that has developmental difficulties, and let's talk about the IQ testing, let's talk about neuropsych. We said neuropsych and the IQ test measure some language skills. The IQ test measures some visual perceptual skills, how well you can see things. It measures some fine motor skills. It measures some visual plus motor skills. It measures some language skills. There's a whole different parts of the IQ test. And if you have dyslexia, we know it's a language-based learning difficulty. And so it's going to affect your ability to do some parts of the IQ test. Commonly, you'll struggle to do digit span. You'll struggle to say back numbers. You'll lose the numbers, especially when they say to you, hey, now I'm going to say the numbers to you, and you get to say them backwards. And people are like, oh, I couldn't even do them forwards. How am I doing them backwards? And that's because part of that task requires an auditory memory skill that relies on your ability to hold on to words. And one of the hallmark deficits of dyslexia is poor phonological awareness, which is how we can hold on to structures we call words, hold on to them, split them apart, manipulate them. You're not as strong at holding on to words. So that means numbers can even be more complicated. There's other parts of the IQ test that you may struggle with because many people who have dyslexia also have some visual motor difficulties. And so they'll score low on what's called coding or symbol search. And these are subtests that require you to scan and mark stuff or draw some shapes as fast as you can. And you're going to score low on those parts of the IQ test. But because you have general difficulties in all visual motor tasks, or you have general difficulties in all auditory memory tasks, it's not your IQ that's really measuring. It's measuring part of your difficulties of information processing, whether it's visual, whether it's fine motor and visual, or it's language. Those processing difficulties make it harder for you to do those parts of the IQ test. So commonly, IQ tests will underreport the IQ of somebody who has dyslexia. So Trey, I'm happy to tell you it's probably unlikely that your IQ really is 70, 75, unless every subtest of the IQ test scored in that range. So somebody who truly has a lower IQ, which basically means it's not a measure of your potential, it's a measure of your rate of learning. Somebody with a lower IQ, if it is 70 or 75, and I've worked with people who have IQs in the 70s or the 75s, they can still learn how to read, they can still learn how to spell, they can still learn math skills, but it might take them 2 to 3 times longer to learn that basic level skills as somebody who has a higher IQ. So IQ doesn't tell us how much or how far we can take you in learning. It just tells us it's probably going to be a longer road. It's going to take more time. We don't really quite know when we're going to hit a ceiling of we've got your skills at your maximum potential. That's really what IQ is going to let you know about. Now, IQ is not supposed to change. I've been working with kids, teenagers, 8-year-olds, 38-year-olds for about 39 years now in different environments. And IQ is not supposed to change, but surprisingly, when you have a language-based learning difficulty like dyslexia, and if you also have a language disorder, and you have some visual motor difficulties, and we know those are all affecting the IQ test, we actually do see kids who come in scoring truly score a 74, but they have other scores that are like a 100, which is 50th percentile. They have other scores that are, a 110, which is like 65th percentile. So you really can't have an IQ in, the 70s. We have all these skills that are markedly higher than that. If your IQ truly is in 70s, then pretty much most all of your skills should hover within about 5-10 points of 70. So in situations like that, when you actually see that there's gaps in their skills in one areas and lower in other areas, and we do interventions that take the lower skills and make them stronger, and then they go back and redo the IQ test, shouldn't surprise you that they actually now score higher on the IQ test because they're no longer held back by some of the difficulties that they had. There were developmental difficulties. And so as you strengthen language skills, we've seen kids come in IQs testing at the 70s who later on score around a 95. And then most all their skills are kind of closer to 90, 95. And then we have a better idea of that. That's probably where that child's true IQ is, or that adult's true IQ is. And we've got them, functioning at that level. It's kind of like saying, if you have some IQ scores or some language scores, or let me tell you the number one correlate with IQ. It correlates at a 0.8. It means there's like an 80% correlation between this and your IQ. So if you have a correlate of 0.8 between vocabulary and IQ, that means when we test your vocabulary by saying, a word and you point to the picture, if your vocabulary comes in at the 85th percentile, then we know that's your potential for anything you can learn. We know should be able to get your spelling to 85th percentile. We should be able to get your sensory motor skills to 85th percentile if we have evidence-based treatments on how to change those skills. In my companies and our ability to do this work, we have lots of expertise in changing some skills and other skills we do not. And we'll explain that to parents. What do we know we can change? What does nobody have any treatment to yet change? And then put those things into place. And so Trey gives us a follow-up. He says, I don't believe it now, Dr. Conway. I know better. I know suspect after listening to you and others that psychologists didn't know what she was talking about. Well, and we'll give them the benefit of the doubt too, Trey. We might say that psychologist told you as much as they knew at that time, but today we know more. And that's going to be true of every profession. How much I can explain to you today is markedly more than what I could explain to you 20 years ago. But 20 years ago, we were telling you the best we knew at that point in time. So I don't think a psychologist would intentionally try to mislead somebody, but that may have been the extent of their knowledge and the extent of what they believed. And they're trying to be helpful, hopefully. We'll give them the benefit of the doubt. So I appreciate you sharing that piece, Trey. We've got someone who's talking about attempting to get insurance in California to cover remediation. The state recognizes, and I think we're talking about dyslexia as a neurobiological base, so I should be able to get treatment covered. It's going to depend on your policy, and it's depend on who's delivering the treatment. No insurance policies actually cover learning disabilities remediation because they consider it to be an educational tutoring service, unless it's being provided by a speech pathologist. And if your insurance policy covers speech therapy and you have a speech pathologist who's going to deliver the evidence-based remediation, which Polygon accurately says the next step will be an evidence-based program, which you're going to require. And yeah, we have an evidence-based program called the NOW program, and then help not even be forced to try programs that do not have evidence. It's kind of like saying, do you want to try vitamin C for strep throat? Because some people think it helps. Or do you want to try penicillin for strep throat? Which one has the scientific evidence that it's going to work? We know it's vitamin C that is not scientifically proven. It's penicillin. So the same thing is true of dyslexia interventions. My company spent decades perfecting the NOW foundations for speech, language, reading, and spelling program. We know that we can take students from the 5th percentile of reading skills to the rock solid average skills, which is about the 50th percentile, in a matter of months, not years. And we have the scientific evidence to prove it. We actually did all the research before we built this nowprograms.com company that's bringing the services to kids in schools, to you in the private sector, and basically all over the world we do those services. So Polygon, you're right. You're on the step of if you can get it covered and insurance can cover it, then you've got some financial resources. Now, know there's another option for kids who are school-aged. Many states, I think it's about 17 of them, have ESA funds. It's ESA. And ESA funds are kind of like school choice. It gives you a set amount of money to use to buy additional services that you think your child needs. In Indiana, the ESA funds are about $19,999 per child, but only if the family also has low income. In Florida, it has nothing to do with your income. If you have a diagnosis of dyslexia or autism or developmental disorder diagnosis, you can apply for what we call Step Up for Students Unique Abilities Scholarship. And you could get up to $10,000 a year to help cover speech therapy, OT, other interventions that you might need. So make sure that if you're a parent looking for resources, talk to our team. We do free consultations. We'll help you know what might be available. And we want to help you get those funding and get those services because every family has limited financial resources. And the better we got, then the better we can do with the actual outcomes. Polygon's giving us another follow-up. And by the way, I love the puppy or the dog. Currently, he got a speech pathologist referral, and she's reaching out for research that she can provide then. Know that the Now Programs company has tons of research. I'll pull some of it up right now and just show them to you and say that all of our research is readily available on the web. This is a paper we published in 1991 that was one of our pilot studies showing how we can actually get those services going and how we can actually change skills over time. We have other papers, and if we can put up the papers, I don't see the link there. I'll let my tech help put those up. We have other papers that we're looking at how we could change. Some of the theory part of that. That's the dyslexia theory. We do randomized controlled trials, and here's why. These are 5 things that happen with research that's been done with a randomized controlled trial that does not exist for other studies, especially if they're not even peer-reviewed studies and not even published professional studies, the randomized controlled trials have the best scientific rigor. They're the gold standard. The outcomes are proven, they're highly reliable. Number three, they actually help us prove that the treatment probably caused the change. And it's not just some random event that doesn't always happen. When you have a randomized controlled trial, you can be very confident that the outcomes that study showed is going to happen for any kid anywhere in the world who has the same presentation of being 8 years old and they've got an average IQ and they can't read well yet. Then this intervention is probably going to have the same outcome for that kid as a kid in India, as an 8-year-old kid in the US States, as an 8-year-old kid in Germany. Doesn't matter where the kid is, the brain works pretty much the same around the world in how we actually remediate and rebuild reading skills. The RCTs also help you have parents make better choices of, should I try this program? I had a parent email me recently and say, hey, the school's using program X. They think about changing to program Y. What do you think about that? And I had to say, well, there's no evidence that program X works. There's no randomized controlled trial, so we're guessing. And there's actually no evidence that program Y works either. So whether you use X or whether you use Y, we got a 50-50 chance it might do something. We have no confidence it's really going to make a big change. So there's almost no point in guessing from one. It's kind of like saying vitamin C didn't help strep throat. Maybe you should try vitamin D. Well, you can try all the vitamins you want, but there's no scientific evidence that vitamins actually help treat the bacteria that causes strep throat. The evidence from randomized controlled trials is penicillin. So it's helping parents make better choices so you don't waste money on programs that actually likely don't work. Our biggest challenge with this in the educational field is there's lots of hearsay, there's lots of what's popular, there's lots of, hey, I hear this might help and I heard this might help, and we just got people guessing and guessing and guessing. That amount of guessing does not happen in healthcare because healthcare is primarily driven by as many randomized controlled trials as possible. In education, that's not the common standard and it's not even required. So we then have a paper about preventing dyslexia. We started publishing that in 97. We did the final paper in 1999, and we showed that we could help more than 91% of 5-year-olds succeed when if you did phonics, you did a little extra one-on-one, you did nothing, you get anywhere from 75 to 59% don't pass kindergarten or first grade. And the real test of a treatment is what happens after you stop the treatment. So all these slides, there's a whole bunch of them showing the data, showing the studies. Here's our study on remediating dyslexia. There's TED Talks about this. There's professional talks about this. Know that you can go to these options there to get that information for Polygon to get the research you need to help get to the speech therapist that might help you get the coverage to get the services. And my team will always provide you with as much help as possible. And all our consultations are free. We've been doing free consultations, like thousands of hours of free consultations for almost 12 years now, long time. So Susie Q says, is there a Now group in Australia? Well, Susie, the Now company is global. We've got about 100 instructors online every day. We can work with kids anywhere in the world, whether they're 6, 16, or 66. The age doesn't matter. And we have different folks in different time zones. We have people in the Atlantic time zone, Pacific time zone, all across the US time zones. At times we have folks in the UK who are doing services for us as well. We have sometimes have folks in Canada who are part of our instructional team. So if we don't have somebody there, we'll get somebody there. We train and we manage our own instructional team. Why? Because quality of delivery of services is a really big time-consuming venture. So I have a whole quality control team that does the training and then mentors, monitors. We never stop mentoring and monitoring. So when you purchase services from the nowprograms.com, you're actually purchasing a whole team of experts to help make sure your 10-year-old, 30-year-old, or your 65-year-old, because believe it or not, our oldest person online was 74 so far. Our first person online was a heart surgeon who couldn't sound out words. And he was in his mid-40s. He knew he had dyslexia, but now he had children and they were catching his mistakes when he read bedtime stories. And they knew if he was making it up and not reading the story. And he's a heart surgeon, very brilliant man, but could not sound out words to read, could not sound out words to spell, and had just done 10 steps to get through tasks when his colleagues in grad school or in medical school were doing 3 steps. So he's burning so much more fuel, so many more steps, it doesn't really help him be as effective. So Susie Q, we actually put students online anywhere in the world. You'll ask questions about accent, questions about what if they don't use our same alphabet. Those aren't a problem for us because what my company's training is not your language or training the child's language processor. What that means is your ability to perceive sounds, hold on to sounds, split words apart, that language processor is what you use to learn any language. So just because you grew up in Australia speaking the Australian versions of English, then you've got some different vowel sounds, you've got some different colloquial phrases, terminology, vocabulary is different, but you use the language processor to learn those sounds. If that language processor is strengthened in English, it actually still strengthens your skills in speaking Australian English versus North American English. Another example is we get bilinguals, which is a bigger difference than just Australian English from a North American, Spanish versus English. When we do intervention in English for someone who's a Spanish native speaker, but they also are bilingual in English and they're dyslexic in both languages, we train the language processor in English. We have standardized testing in English, standardized testing in Spanish, both show dyslexia. We train it in English, and then the child actually makes gains in Spanish. And we didn't do any work in Spanish. But because we train the ability to perceive sounds, judge those 5 mistakes that they can make in reading: adding sounds, leaving out sounds, substituting sounds, repeating sounds, reversing sounds. We're training the brain's ability to process those sound changes for any sound structure of language. They now can do that better in their native language. So contact us. We're happy to talk to you about how we get services in Australia. And yes, we actually do hire instructors in Australia, and we train them and we make them accessible to other folks in Australia. And they're part of our whole team because we've been doing this for decades. We started doing online services in 2008 through my medical clinics called the Morris Center. We started the online version of it at a full-blown company in 2013. So Carly has another question. She wants to know, how does this work if school doesn't use this program? Would it require them adopting this program to work? And I'm worried he'll be confused between school and home. Yeah, schools are legally, federally required to do some services. And for schools who are required to do some services, typically they're going to do what we call print to speech programs. Print means they're going from the letters, or letters that you might see on pages, and then they're going from letters to sounds. But no language in the world do you actually learn how to read it, spell it first, and then learn how to speak it later. Every language in the world is a spoken language first, and then you actually learn how to read and spell it second. So all the work we do in now programs comes from developmental science, and it's a speech processing first, print second. Now, unfortunately, some educators are calling their program speech to print, but any program that's using letters and sounds immediately, that is not a speech to print program. Speech to print means you're working on all the language processing of what a sounds look like, what a sounds sound like, how the mouth is moving to make these sounds, and you're doing nothing with letters yet. There's a whole developmental hierarchy of how you build that skill. Think of it this way. Most kids are listening to mom and dad speak right after birth, and then they start speaking around 12 months of age, and then they're talking at about 4 years of age, and then we teach them the alphabet letters. But from birth to age 4, they were just building this speech processing system of, can I hear the word mom says, can I say it back? Can I match my movements of my mouth? Because mom says I'm saying it wrong. I'm saying ba, and she's going, no, honey, it's not a ba, it's a ba. Oh. And mom slows down and shows me where to put my tongue. And you're building that phonological language processor very early on, and then letters come later on. So the only true speech to print programs are like those from the Now Foundations for Speech, Language, Reading, and Spelling program. We've been pioneering this, built on top of work my aunt and uncle did in the 60s. And they were a speech therapist and a linguist. So we're trying to pull those pieces together. So even if the school is doing a phonics program, we'll tell the kids, look, you're going to learn all these rules about when you use GE and DGE. You'll use rules about syllable types. Have fun learning those. But we're going to teach you a more sensible, a more concrete, and more pragmatic approach to how you sound out words without all this memorization. Because those of you who are accurate readers and spellers, and you've had no phonics instructions, some of you didn't actually get phonics, if I say to you, hey, why do you spell cage with a GE and you spell fudge with a DG? Why do you do that? And the most common response is, because that's how you spell it. And nobody had to teach these fully literate adults that, well, if the vowel's a long vowel, you put a GE on. So in cage, A is a long vowel, you have to use a GE. But in fudge, that's a short vowel, so you have to use DGE. Nobody taught the parents that, who are fully literate, functional readers and spellers. Their brain picked up on that piece automatically because they had really strong phonological processors. So it's not really going to confuse the kids too much. We'll let them know what school is doing is a little bit different, what we're doing is different, and the two will coalesce together or coordinate together over time. So it's something that we actually typically can't stop because the schools are legally required to do something. Some schools will let us be the push-in services. Some schools actually write contracts with the nowprograms.com company, and we are the provider of special ed services. We've had some schools that let us put 400 kids online. They're all struggling to read and spell. We've got them in groups online. We're doing daily sessions every day, 45 minutes a day, and it's not costing the parents a dime. The kids are actually getting all the services for free because the school chose to partner with the Now Programs company. We can do those partnerships in all Boston City public schools. We're authorized to do those partnerships in all South Carolina schools, all North Carolina schools, some schools in Texas, and we're working right now on getting a contract to be able to do those services to all schools in Hawaii. We'll write contracts like that with any state that will partner with us to help us provide them with highly effective evidence-based services for the kids in their school. Because it's not something we have to do year after year after year. It's a one and done. Build the skills and we can back away and we're done. I hope that's more clear to you and helps you understand what's going on. Know too that we have a whole YouTube channel. We've got parents who are talking about their kids' success. If you call and talk to our intake team, you can go to nowprograms.com, click on the free consultation button, book yourself on a calendar, and you've got questions. My intake team will answer questions as many as you want to ask. And if you want to talk to parents who've already had similar children with similar ages and similar difficulty levels as your child, or if you want to talk to an adult, if you're a firefighter and you can't pass your promotion exam, then you can talk to the adult who is like you, who's already been through the program, and they can tell you, what it was like as an adult age 54 to go through Now Programs. What is an adult like a, sheriff's deputy who actually went through the program at age 53, as an IT professional, went through the program at age 45. Those are things that will readily make available to you because you can then talk to other people who've already done what you're talking about doing to understand what's really possible and how much could that help. Carly, I'm glad that was helpful to you. And Susie, we're absolutely happy to have you send an email to us. Go to that info@nowprograms.com and ask them to get considered to be one of our hires to help us expand services availability in Australia. Because not having to juggle time zones, that's always better for all of us. Well, guys, that is 51 minutes of me talking almost nonstop. Hope this has been helpful to you. Hope it gives you a better perspective on neuropsych testing, why we do it, what you should be asking about, how we want you to understand what a neuropsych eval is, but also know it's always not relevant. You don't always have to have a neuropsych eval to know what to do. We know that if you struggle to read and spell, largest likely cause of reading and spelling problems is going to be the phonological awareness, phonological processing difficulty. You're mispronouncing words, you're misreading words, you're misspelling words. Those are behaviors that mean your phonological processor is not working well. We have one of the #1 most tested, most well-treated programs, and it's got the widest price point of any other company I know because our goal is to help as many people as possible. We have $30 an hour opportunities. We have $50 an hour opportunities. We have $85 an hour opportunities. And then we also have one thing that we haven't talked about yet, but if you have a 3 to 6 year old, we built this new app just for your kids. This is Lip Letterland. Lip Letterland, let's say my dyslexia program or my literacy enrichment program has 20 steps. This is step 1 and 2. It's for kids age 3 to 6. It's going to build that early phonological processor while they play this crazy game. It has mouth movies, it has a line named Lucky the Lion. It's doing all kinds of stuff to help your 3 to 6 year old make sure that phonological processor, and then it combines it to their letters. So they know their letters, they know what their mouth is doing. And guess what? If most kids play this, you'll be very shocked that you will not see kids mixing up their B's and D's if they've played this app. Why? Because then they know that their lips are making a lip popper or it's making a tongue tapper. And Susie Q, we would love to hear your feedback on what you think of Lip Letterland. We are almost out with the Android version. Give me no more than 2 months. The programmers are working away on it every day right now. Maybe it's going to be 2 weeks, I hope, but pretty soon it's going to launch in the Google Play Store. And that app is only $6.99. It actually can be purchased by schools. Schools can do 500 downloads of that app, and they get a 50% discount from Apple if they're actually an Apple educational partner who does bulk downloads. If they bulk download that app at the 50% discount, it's only going to cost them 50 cents a month per kid. we're quite sure that fits their budget. We've made this so budget friendly, so budget affordable, that then they've got it going and that can work on it as well. And we appreciate that feedback, Susie. We want to do more of that in the app. The app actually turns on the camera and the kids can see themselves on the screen. They love seeing themselves on the screen. And they're going E, they're going B, they're going T, and they're actually learning to wire that phonological processor. We've got more coming that's going to make it even more effective. That's our first version. Well, folks, thank you so much for our time. I've run over by about 4.5, almost 5 minutes. And I want to try to stick to what's supposed to be a 50-minute presentation. Contact us at nowprograms.com. Learn more about our medical clinics at themorriscenter.com. Learn about Lip Letterland at lipletterland.com. And we jokingly say, if your kid is 3, 4, 5, or 6 and they can't say Lip Letterland, and they say Whip Wetterwand or Rip Retterand, whatever it is they say, they probably need to be playing this app to strengthen that phonological processor. And this is not just for kids who struggle. This is the early enrichment app for any kid anywhere in the world. You want to be sure they got the best chance of being strong readers, strong spellers, and not struggling. Take it from a dyslexic brain scientist who I got empowerment at age 5, and I had the full opportunity to choose whatever I wanted to do with my profession, with my intellect, with my drive, with my interests. And that's our goal for your kids and your siblings, your spouses. We want everybody to have the best skills possible to get the best choices and to do the one thing that the French call joie de vivre. That is, when you've got all those skills, hopefully life is more enjoyable. Because right now, a lot of people are traumatized by dyslexia. They're misled to thinking it's a brain wiring, permanent wiring difference. That's not true at all. Every human brain can rewire because that's called learning. Every brain is capable of learning. So it's mind-boggling that some dyslexics have been convinced that they can be really good at mental imagery skills, but they actually can't learn how to read and spell. Of course you can, but only if somebody gives you evidence-based instruction with a program that's been tested and proven to be highly effective. And that program typically does not exist at any schools. It's not for our lack of trying, let me tell you, but it's something we push out to schools on the daily now. And if you have a school that you think should be working with us, I have a whole K through 12 educational services division, and they will actually be happy to help your kids get services in the school. We've got Davidica McConnell, who so kindly and sweetly says, these programs changed her child's life. So her daughter actually has a business, and she's got a business running. She's an entrepreneur because she can. She's got the reading skills. She got the comprehension skills. And thanks for sharing that, Davidica. That's what we want for everybody. So folks, thanks again. Thanks for all that you've done to help us share this message. All of these podcasts are on our YouTube channel at Now Programs Online. Watch them anytime you want. Post comments there. Post comments other places, and we're happy to respond and share more information with you. Thanks so much. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week for another episode of a different podcast called Dyslexia Success Stories. Listen to people talk to you about what they've already changed, how we've actually empowered them with nowprograms.com, or we empowered them through the morriscenter.com medical clinics. They're phenomenal stories, and they're very empowering, and they help raise the bar on what we want you to expect as possible. And Trey, I'm talking to you as well. Don't be settling for less. Polygon, know that we can do more to help build those skills, and that's what we want to do. Take care, everyone. Have a great evening.